All right, it's 3 o'clock. Go ahead and get started. So sorry, having.
This one, yeah.
All right, take two. It's 3 o'clock. That's 3:01. Let's go ahead and get started here. Um, Welcome. My name is Brian Hirsch. I'm with 30 to 80. 30 to 80's mission is to help government organizations deliver successful government digital product projects more frequently. Currently, the industry average success rate is somewhere below 30%. We want to get to greater than 80%, repeatably, reliably, all of the time. We run an accelerator program for people who are setting up product teams, doing product development in government, and we also do delivery management and work with wonderful partners like Lullabot. And I'm really excited today to bring on our guest, Marissa Epstein, who's a senior user experience designer at Lullabot. And she's going to be talking with us about site audits and content strategy. So, Marissa, why don't you come on? Okay, now I can see you. Great.
Little bit of a lag. There we go. Hi.
Welcome.
Thanks for
So
having
before
me.
we dive into the main topic here, I wonder if you could just briefly introduce yourself and Lullabot.
Sure. I'm Marissa Epstein. A lot of folks call me Mars. Either's fine. I am a, senior user experience strategist at Lullabot, which I realize is a mouthful. But I do a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of therapy. Lullabot is amazing. I've been there for a decade. I started as a user experience designer. And we do strategy design and development, particularly in Drupal, particularly for large scale publishing. We love big, sticky Drupal problems and fixing things in your forms. Yeah, we're all remote and employee owned.
Excellent.
Leave it there.
Well, I'm so excited to have you here. I have known Lullabot for a very long time, and I guess actually I don't normally do this, but I'm gonna just like bolt a little add-on to your intro of Lullabot because I feel I want to like take some credit. I have this vivid memory. I knew Lullabot from before I worked for the state of Massachusetts, but when I was chief digital officer in Massachusetts, I so wanted Lullabot, to bid on our projects, and I was sort of heartbroken when Lullabot did not bid on the initial procurement for the redesign for mass.gov. And I have this vivid memory of talking to one of the two owners of Lullabot at the time at a conference, and he told me, "We don't bid on RFPs." When you're as awesome as Lullabot, the work finds you apparently when you do websites like the Grammys and NBC. And so anyways, I wore him down, and I'm so happy that now Lullabot has done incredible work, not just for Massachusetts, but also on Georgia.gov and now working on Iowa.gov. And so I claim this as a personal victory that Lullabot is doing great work now in public sector. And so as people here will hear, Lullabot is not just a shop of technologists, but also brings all kinds of other great expertise to bear, and that's one of the reasons that they built incredible digital experiences. So.
Thank
I
you.
thought, sorry?
I just said thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So we're so fortunate to have Marissa here to talk to us about how they do what they do. Before we get into the details of site audits, I just want to make sure everybody here can follow along to what we're talking about. Everybody knows what a website is. Everybody knows when they want a new one. Not as many people know what content strategy is or what goes into a site audit. So I'm hoping you can just start out explaining some of the foundational concepts here. What is content strategy?
Sure. I love this one, and I could talk for an hour just on this. So I went to find my favorite definition just in case. Um, Brain Traffic has this great definition and graphic of what it is. And simply, it's guiding the creation, delivery, and governance of useful, usable content. So a metaphor that I love is, especially as a designer formerly, imagine a speed limit sign, and the metal is beautifully designed and the layout is gorgeous and there are no numbers. That is the value of content and being strategic about where it goes and how it's presented. Or what if there was the speed limit on the sign, but there are 600 other words and it's really small and you've got to find it while you're driving. So trying to make things much more clear, much more usable is where that intersects with user experience work. I hear a lot of folks talk about content design, and I like to say it's half. So content strategy includes a lot of things, and different content strategists are very different. We all nerd out about a different thing. I am a structure nerd, so I like taxonomy and organization and systems thinking, which is one half of content strategy, and the other half is that content design. I could go on and on with my metaphors. I have one more saved up, but I'll pause there in case you want to clarify anything.
I love that analogy, and we have so much to nerd out about, so I'm going to just keep us moving. What is a site audit?
Sure. Yes. So how can you decide what useful, usable content to put on your website if you don't know what's on your website? That's usually my favorite point. So I do think this ties in really well. The previous metaphor, I'll pare it down for site audits of what if you're moving houses? And you could box everything up in your old house and put all of it in your new house and figure out where it goes. Or you could take that moment, in this example, a website redesign or a big migration or some larger project, just as an example, and actually really plan what's going to stay, what's going to go, what needs to be consolidated, what you want to keep, but it's kind of a project. There's some to-dos that come out. And so content inventory is a list simply of all the stuff that you have. And site auditing is going through that and making those decisions. Okay, I'm going to keep these plates, but we'll put them in the basement. So it's that big understanding of what everything is, and then that line by line, really going through your content and learning what's there.
Excellent. You make it all sound so simple, but I know it's not so simple.
It's not, yeah.
Yeah.
Some of it really can be. So I'll give that encouragement to everyone. Yeah.
Great. Okay. All right. I think that was a good level set. I really want to get into some stories. I want to ask you about the work you're doing right now on Iowa.gov. Now, you've also got some really great stories to tell from your work on Mass.gov. And I think people also are going to love hearing about the tools that you actually use, like practical, tactical
Yeah.
stuff. So for the basic flow of this conversation, I've got a lot of questions I want to ask you. I will make a point, folks tuning in and listening here, I will make a point of stopping 2 or 3 times along the way. So we'll talk about Iowa, and then we'll like stop and do some Q&A, and then I'll ask Marissa some questions about Massachusetts, and then we'll stop for questions, and then we'll do tools, and I'll make sure to bring in questions as they're coming in. So folks who have questions, please chime in the Q&A box, and I'll make sure we take time to get to as many of those as we can during this conversation.
Um, I'm going to jump in briefly and say, thinking about the Iowa story I want to tell, let me pull up just a couple visuals
Yeah.
that I think will really help demystify some of what I'm saying. And speaking of visuals, meet my dog Elwood. Hopefully he doesn't give us too much trouble today, but he ran in at the beginning of our talk and sent his bed flying. So, okay. I talked about inventory and audit, and I thought this would really have helped. So let me backtrack a little bit. So Screaming Frog, when you mentioned tools, that's where my brain started. Screaming Frog is a tool that I use to do that inventory. So like I said, scanning your site and just understanding what you have now gives you that full picture. So this is just a screenshot of the tool where I'm doing a scan of lullabot.com, and it's showing me all of the URLs, it's showing me their structure, and giving me lots of little metadata if there are any errors and things like that. Now, this is great, but not very accessible to everyone. So what I do with it is an audit. So I stare at these spreadsheets for a lot of my day. I put at the bottom just all of the kinds of columns that are important. What's the page title? What's the URL? If we have analytics, how often is this being viewed? What is the reading level? I like to show the date it was last updated when we have that metadata also to call out, this is getting a lot of traffic or this isn't, and it's hard to read and it's old. And hopefully all of that context in that sort of purple and blue columns, if you can see those, really leads you into this pink section. And the big question of the audit is always keep, edit, delete, or consolidate. Okay, this is great. You have all of this information. Each of these rows is a page, but are they all just going over as they are? Some are getting deleted. Some need to be refreshed. Some get combined. We make tons of conversations and ideas in these docs and then track them as we go through the work later. So we talk about the inventory and audit a little interchangeably, but I thought I'd give you that visual. Yeah, hope that's helpful. And yeah, I'll stop jumping in.
Got it. Great. That's awesome. So at a high level,
Thanks.
all the site audits, have a similar sort of footprint that looks something like what you just had on the screen.
Hmm.
Great.
Just bigger or smaller and depends a little bit on the data that you have. So like I said, hopefully I can see the metadata that really helps me make those decisions, like age and usage and quality, stuff like that.
Got it.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So I'm a very concrete thinker, so I really rely on stories and visuals. The visuals are really helpful. I wonder if we could just like anchor to the Iowa story first. So
Mhm.
I know this is your latest big government project. Maybe you could start us off there with what was the impetus for the iowa.gov website redesign? What problem is this project aiming to solve?
I mean, a few, but the DX transformation project I started in the spring of 22, and we're still on it, still working away at the different websites within Iowa. So the biggest goal ultimately from the governor was to make things easier for users. And they found that the inconsistency across the websites could be hard. People might not trust if this is a government website because it looks so different from the government website they came from. So some of this was look and feel, but content comes into play for that consistency too. So we found people kind of struggling as they were navigating from site to site. And then before we came on, Iowa was very curious about what users felt, if this was the case. They had a couple different areas of feedback. So one of the first things we did was find out where the problems really were. We used that goalpost of helping users and did a little research into that. And I will zoom back out and say the scope of this project is almost every website within the state of Iowa is coming into the same Drupal platform. So we modeled and structured how that platform should work. And then as each site comes in, we help them with their unique navigation structure and the details of the content design for making their most important pages beautiful and a lot of things in between. So that's kind of my, feel free to poke at that more. I've gotten worse at my Iowa pitch the longer I've been on the project, it seems.
Okay, great. I heard you say the DX, you called it the DX project, digital experience for iowa.gov, is that right?
Uh, yes,
Okay. And
thank you.
is the DX project bigger than iowa.gov, or that is the iowa.gov redesign project?
That is the Iowa.gov redesign project.
Okay,
And even within other Iowa projects and initiatives, those are even referencing DX. It's kind of inspiring some other stuff in the state, which has been exciting. But those are kind of their own projects too.
got it. Okay, great. So we know you're passionate about a good site audit. Can you tell us about your Iowa site audit? What did you do? What did you learn?
Sure. I chuckle a little bit because I wish it was just one in a way. I've probably done 80. So it's each agency and what their site looks like now. And they have over 60 divisions and departments when we started, I should say had. Part of the project ended up being consolidation. So, for example, Dial is the Department of Inspections, Appeals, and Licensing, and they had a separate website and agency for licensing for nurses and licensing for dentists. And all of that had to come together. So tons and tons and tons of audits built each of these smaller pieces. So yeah, let me think of a good example for you. I mean, we have been doing a lot of these scans for each of the different agencies and walking them through each time, kind of handing those over. I did steal that one because I felt like that was safe to share. But people are still working in those audits now, reviewing their content, making changes. So I wouldn't necessarily share. But what can I paint for you more verbally? Maybe the process of how we did that.
Sure.
We had a huge schedule, and we began with the website for the governor. It was kind of the first launch and our big timing. And so it was the first one, we used a couple of the initial audits to define the model, and then we were working like clockwork. So every 4 to 6 weeks, we would scan 3 or 4 sites. We let the team know that their site might get a little bit of extra traffic because it's my screaming frog just digging around in the website, and had everything scheduled that way, and then set them up ourselves. So I go into that Screaming Frog tool. It pulls tons of stuff. And for each one of them, we cleaned it up a little bit and said, these are the columns that really matter to you. Or we rewrote a template to reuse for the agencies that's a little more conversational or a little more clear around why this matters to them or what this obscure phrase means. So that was something I was proud of too, is just taking this very nerdy thing and simplifying it a little more for authors that might work on their website only part-time or might be completely new to Drupal, and so trying to keep it at much higher level. So we walked through with each agency and taught them how to audit and gave them documentation and things like that. We had open office hours so they could hop in while they were going through their content to understand it. And then as they made those decisions, and I want to be clear, I would make recommendations. I don't think you need this anymore. These seem really similar. But ultimately, it's up to those subject matter experts to really dig in and confirm that. And there were times where I found these are, different versions of motor carrier commercial licenses and all kinds of little nuances that I'm still learning about. So it's really up to them to make the decisions of how the content is now. And then from there, hand it back to me, and I could make a recommendation of what to do next. The other big deliverable that I didn't throw in my visuals today is called a content matrix, and that is the blueprint for the website. So the happy ending for a lot of these site audit processes is having a very structured sitemap-esque explanation of what everything is that's going to go on the site, where it goes, where it is structured in the navigation, what the page title is, if it has something that exists already, if it's getting edited in a particular way. And that ultimately became the punch list for the new site and all the things they needed to do before launch. They were able to really prioritize the tasks that we kind of came up with together and tweak stuff before their launches. So, I can't take full credit. The any folks that I work with on this really do a lot of work in learning about their content and telling me what to do with it. And so props to Iowa for running with our audit process as well.
So I know the project is still ongoing, but do you have any early indications that the changes that you're making are having the intended effect and improving Iowans' digital experience?
For the most part, yes. I'm really excited for the user quotes, So the one thing I could share briefly is that we did research as part of this process. So this wasn't for everyone, but sometimes we really got to dig in. So this is just a quick visual showing on the left of Google Form. So, free, easy tool to create. And we used existing email lists called their Gov delivery system. So if someone was subscribed to the agency, we could ask them to fill this out. And so just an example, you can see my favorite question is, did you accomplish what you came to do today? So I'll ask them in a field, like, what were you coming to do? Because it helps me learn how they describe it. And then this is, mostly yes, but a lot of no. And then the conditional form would say, oh, what were you trying to find? What happened instead? And we'd learn about a lot of problems. So the thing I'm really looking forward to is when we do this after a couple more launches again, and we use this as a benchmark, and we see how much that pie chart changes and how much the easy to use 1 through 5 recommendation changes. So that's coming, and that'll be a little more feedback from real users, like what we got to kind of inform the start of the project. That said, um, in I took this benchmark a little while ago, but a third of the content has been removed. So that just think about, old articles, things that aren't really needed anymore, tons of pages where there was a similar answer in 2 places. We had asked for, I believe it was a 20% reduction for each site, and not everyone loved that. And most of them removed significantly more. And not from our doing, but from realizing that it doesn't need to be there. Now, back to your question, I strongly believe that if there's less cruft to search through and sort, then it's so much easier to find something. We're teaching things like distinguishing the titles,
When
and
you
that's
say
helping too.
less craft, can you
Go
just say
ahead.
what is craft when you say there's
Yeah, great. Oh my gosh, perfect question. So there's a thing in content strategy called rot, which I love because it sounds gross. And so we can say, oh, it sounds like content rot. And what that means is R, redundant, O, outdated, or T, trivial. So I like to do this kind of rude thing where someone will show me a site or a page and I'll go, why do you have this? Why is this even here? And, most of the time there's a very good question, a very good answer, and I learned something and I understand. Or maybe I say, why are these both here? But if there isn't an answer, imagine how confused the users are coming here. This is your content that you understand. They don't get the difference. So more feedback TBD there. But I've been feeling really good about the amount that's already changed and the agency that's running the DX project within Iowa has a ton of other metrics that they'll be tracking. So I'm very excited to announce them when they happen. But there's an accessibility score, a quality score of the content. So how high is the reading level? Is this plain language enough to read and understand? Do you have broken links? Things like that. So even just this process has allowed authors and agencies to uncover the kinds of problems that they're having and just start changing them, pre-launch, post-launch. So I do believe we've had a number of improvements. You might get into this next, but I will say we had one agency where we did a ton of this kind of research. And so we're getting a little bit more there.
awesome? Let's go there. I always want to know what do we know from end users? What do we know from feedback from real people who use the website and in every large organization.
Me
Some
too.
know a
Yeah.
lot about that and some people don't know a lot. And I know that the Department of Transportation has been a really great partner to you all, and I assume that's who you're talking about. Um,
Yeah, I was gonna say I've nerded out enough about the web team over at DOT at this point. It's no surprise.
Yeah, take us
Yeah.
there.
Uh,
What do they know? What makes them stand out as a great partner? Tell us about that.
I will say that DOT has Department of Transportation has one of the tallest orders in the state. And I'm going to guess that that's a fairly common pattern across other states because the content and the wealth of information and the specificity of some information and just the scale of site traffic for transportation is huge. Almost everyone has a license. Almost everyone needs to renew that. Like it just continues where there's tons of just the scale and the scope is really something. But the team over there, Charisse Ogg leads a small web team, and underneath Charisse, Rick, and Mark are tons and tons of subject matter experts. So not only are they wrangling the scale of the content, but they're wrangling the scale of the team. Now, one of the things that they do so well, though, is that because they're not making decisions off the cuff, they're not listening to their gut. And I've had some stakeholders in the past say, this is what people want. And we have a really humble bunch of folks that say, let's go find out what people want. So some of that is relying really strongly on the subject matter experts and the subdivisions within to teach them about what their needs are. But they also are one of the most data-driven agencies I've worked with in some time. And I've really enjoyed that. So one little example, something I like to nerd out about, if you go to their Google Analytics, we've spent a lot of time reviewing the search terms that people use and filtering them out. And this allows you, without talking to someone, without figuring out the red tape of paying participants for research and government, to just look and see what people use to describe the terms. So these pages might be titled incorrectly because no one uses the phrase you use. So they've been really good about learning from that and keeping it more user focused based on that data. But that's just one example. We've done Google Forms, like I mentioned, with newsletters. My favorite thing that is user-focused from DOT is using a tool called Hotjar that you may have heard of that does heat maps and scrolling, and I'll have to throw that resource in too. But it allows you to do a little pop-up or button on the side of your page to offer a survey. So there was a general feedback about the Department of Transportation that was up for a month. And I got over 100 responses in that time. I was able to see what pages people were on and get a lot of specific feedback about what they were missing, what they were needing, what would be a great improvement for them. And so much of it came down to navigation, being the way that things were connected, the way that they were labeled was the problem. It wasn't that the information wasn't there or it was too old. Sometimes there were three things that had a similar title and one of them's the right one. So that comes back to your content rot and all of that. But we learned so much specifically from users, and I will say that can be a hard that can be a really vulnerable situation. How about that? Because you have people trying to do something really important to their lives and they're struggling and they come to your survey with some anger and tell you how they feel. I've had people suggest I get fired. And you just take kind of a deep breath or a chuckle and like really try to thank them for their time. And I've learned more, I think, about websites from the user feedback than I have in a couple courses in years, because I always learn something new about the way they use things or the way that I assume wrongly that people use websites. So that's been a big one. The last thing I'll say about the Hotjar is even still on their website, they do a thing that is a recommended standard of, did you find what you were looking for? So on any page, there's a little thing that says, did you find it? And the answers are yes or no. It's very simple. And your no offers a follow-up if you optionally want to provide more context. But even if you don't and you're just mad and you hit no, it's going to track what pages that's happening on. So they have a list of these are the pages with the highest complaints, and we're going to start there next. And it's really allowing them to prioritize their work to be more user focused instead of getting, you know, having that focus of the organization.
Yeah, awesome.
Obviously, I love research. Thanks for asking.
So, you know, I'm sure the DOT effort is huge, and I know that it's still ongoing. Is there anywhere that you see work happening, you've seen the feedback come in, and you're feeling especially optimistic about, your expected improvements, and how will you know in 6 months or 12 months if that
Mhm.
expectation, came to fruition?
What a great question. Their launch is in March, so we're going to learn a lot more very soon. One of the things that we had, I mentioned a benchmark earlier of, how's the site working? How are you feeling? Are you finding stuff? How often do you use it? The plan is to send that out again later this year. It's about a year after the previous one, and we can compare those numbers. So let people get used to the site for a little bit and then see, you know, is it easier to use? Do you prefer the look and feel? Did you find what you were looking for? All those kinds of things will allow us to just see very clearly using the same set of questions how people are measuring the site now versus how it was. So that's another one that I can't wait. It's going to be a nice thing for my nerd brain in 2025. But internally, I would say that one of the great successes for me is when I create a content audit or one of those big content matrix blueprints and the site authors run with it. We have people saying, can I edit this? And we're like, if you don't, we'll be a little sad. So I have had so much involvement and so much collaboration from the department, and that's what makes me feel optimistic already. So there were pages where I took a look and I started making recommendations as I'm restructuring the site. And I'm like, hey, there's way too much on this page, or I think you could combine these couple of things into one. And it's kind of happening underneath me. They just totally reworked a big section for commercial drivers that I think they're really proud of. I'm proud. I think it's an improvement already, and we didn't wait for the site launch. That's just happening now. One of the things I've told them is similar to that moving houses thing is, you can bring stuff to Savers now. You can donate things today. You can polish that silver before it gets to the house. And so they've been doing a ton of improvements that if we walked away without the DX platform, we'd have wins, but we're going to get a lot more wins with that big migration. Yeah,
Loving all these
thanks for
analogies.
asking. I
Um,
know, it's all I do.
let's if we don't pause to take in questions, like I'll just keep going and going and going. So let's pause now and ask some questions. Please, if folks who are tuning in live have questions, drop them in the chat or into the Q&A box. So here's one. What do you do when the volume of content vastly exceeds the capacity to review and make updates?
Yes, this is a common problem. So this is a good one. I try to make a win where you can. And so I always want to say to people, I understand that, this might not be your full-time job. You could work for this government or higher ed or whatever agency you're at and just not have enough time to do this. Doesn't mean you can't do anything. It means you're probably not going to be able to get into this granular level of line by line. So let's say you have your audit and you're able to sort it. That's really how I try to just prioritize and start with the things that are important. So, for example, if you have traffic, your analytics for your site, start with the things that people are using a lot. And that really helps. Make sure that those are correct, that everything's there. On the flip side, if I sort by views, and I want to look at, this is a big site. They have hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of views on a lot of their pages. Now, if we flip it, what about all the pages that got no views? Are they hidden? Are they important and need to be surfaced? Or is this something that is no longer useful, or we thought it was, and it's just not? It's too much time, or we need more time to do it. And I say, let's just try what we can group. And we find 200 things that don't need to be there in the 20 minutes that we spent together. And now that audit's a lot smaller and they can go through feeling a little less overwhelmed. So I always try to look at prioritizing by traffic, what's most important, what's least, by reading level, because it should match your audience. Generally, we want eighth grade reading or lower. We don't want to assume that people need to have a bachelor's to go to your site unless it's a very specific thing. We have our exceptions, working for the Institute for Chemical Engineers, a lot of those pages are going to be higher than grade 8 and they can justify it. So, everything depends, but it really helps to just start by making those kinds of tweaks. Another one I would say is if you can define an expiration date for your content. So I like a year. A lot of people prefer 2. You can say, I am going to try to look at everything that was made before 2 years ago, and I have to justify it to you because even if it's still true, it might need some refreshing. If this is our most important content and we haven't updated it in 3 years, let's take a look at that. But a lot of times what happens is those are things that I've had this happen multiple times recently where I've shared a page and said, "What's this for?" And they are like, "Where did you find that?" They can't believe it's on the site. They're as surprised as I am. And so that's a really easy win for don't need that. Yeah, so chunking, chunking, chunking. Yeah, I would say too, you know, some stuff is much higher volume in how it's updated, and I always do those last. So if there's something where it's not changing as much underneath you, that's a little easier. I'll talk about this a little more in one of our other stories, but my work wife at Lullabot, her name is Erin Schrader, and she's also a senior content strategist. She has really encouraged me and talked about this and really propagated this idea of small step content strategy. So I'd be remiss if I didn't give her answer too of just whatever you can, one step at a time. And if it takes you a couple hours each week for months, you're still going to be amazed with what you've managed to accomplish instead of saying, I only have a couple hours every week. It's always an improvement.
I feel like that's probably a good segue to the next one I want to talk to you about. So maybe we'll shift gears here and talk a little bit about mass.gov and the Department of Apprenticeship Standards. So I know Aaron was on that project with you. This is sort of a different than Iowa.gov in that this project started 3 years after the mass.gov redesign, right? So this is like
Mhm.
not a content replatform, not a website redesign as the impetus. Um, Patrick Mitchell from the Department of Apprenticeship Standards reached out to Mass Digital for help on content. And obviously, we brought Lullabot in as a partner to work on that together. And there's so many great stories. I wonder if you could tell us about that. And maybe we could actually just start with a level set on this one. I'm sure there are people who don't know what apprenticeships are. What is the Department of Apprenticeship Standards? And do you remember what problem they were trying to solve when we were getting that started?
Mostly. So yeah, Department of Apprenticeship Standards, there's a whole very cool infrastructure in Massachusetts around apprenticeships within certain industries. You could probably speak to this as much as I could. So they had as a site, as an organization, the goals of attracting young folks to different fields and getting them involved in this apprenticeship program. And on the other side, engaging with businesses and other larger organizations to help apprentice these new hires. So it was a two audience site, which can often be a little complicated because maybe the content doesn't work for you, it works for the other one. They had, like you said, they'd gone through the redesign. It's a very different project. I think that the Iowa work is much more in that systems side of content strategy, even though there's also content design. And the Apprentice Standards project was much more content design, even though there's content strategy. So they've done the big structure, they've done the big stuff, but at the end of that, they still weren't happy with the site because of a lot of different things. I mentioned content rot. That was a problem. So content was outdated, but it's too much to go in and update everything. The same thing I mentioned with Iowa of clunky navigation. It was difficult for users to flow from where they'd start to where they needed to be. Sometimes we find this problem in a flow where someone gets stuck and they never quite get down to where they're going, things like that. And I've mentioned plain language. That was a big thing here as well, because coming from their perspectives within the agency, it's very easy to get into inside baseball. I do it as well. I am very jargon heavy, and I have to be really mindful when I'm speaking to someone not in my silo because those words don't mean very much anymore. And of course, what the users want is actions, not jargon. But again, big difference here in that this is a smaller team with limited resources. And I think they were doing work with the redesign, making improvements, and then kind of said, I think there's more here, and we'd love to have someone come in and really advise us on how to handle this. And that was our opportunity.
Awesome. So what'd you do?
Small step content strategy. The real answer is we did a lot, but we just did it little by little by little. So right off the bat, there's a lot of processes within, processing the process and all this kind of meta stuff where you decide what is the goal and what is the problem and what are the things that we can solve. And so setting up what the strategy is for the improvements that we're going to make. So before we even got into auditing content, we started with that strategy. And so one of the things I'll share with you here that we did for that is a persona. Um, these are a bit of like a polarizing topic, I think, sometimes in our industry because some of what you hear of as personas are the same as that stakeholder that has an idea that they think they know what people need, and then they make that into a persona. This is real research. We learned about different people, we do interviews, and we meet with different representations of different users, try to get a couple of the same type. So meet a bunch of pre-apprentices and talk to them about what their needs are and where their pain points are. It's not so much about the demographics, although we find that that can really help the group kind of remember them. So, I'm really interested in this pre-apprentice persona because I know what her motivations are and I know what her pain points are and I know what kind of experience she's looking for. But it can really help in some cases to say, like Patty pre-apprentice is in, Bolston and wants to work in electrical. And now you have this idea that helps you in making your decisions. It's very easy to kind of get lost in this big process. And so having little things like this helped us set our strategy and understand what we're going to do because it always comes back to our, Patty P. Apprentice. Does this serve this person that we've learned about and kind of condensed all these real people into this idea?
Mhm.
I went a little deep in that detail, but that was really a big first step. Yeah.
I love that you pulled this up. I actually would love to go just a little deeper if you don't mind staying on this for another minute.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm happy to do this before I keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is one of those places where it's great to demystify. So people hear buzzwords like human-centered design and user experience research. And I think one of the first reactions is like if you're in government, it's like, I'm not a researcher, or I don't know how to do that necessarily. And so I feel like I need outside help. And clearly sometimes outside help is wonderful, but I also think it's really important for people to know what they can do themselves. So maybe
Hmm.
you could just talk a little bit more about, you know, who did you talk? You said you talked to pre-apprentices. How many conversations were those? What kinds of things did you ask? And maybe you can even just walk us through the actual words on the screen so everyone has a sense of what is a persona?
Sure.
Like, what does it look like to develop a persona? And then how do you use this document in day-to-day work? How does it actually influence things?
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot there. I mean, I do think that this is one of those things that folks can do. I think it's really helpful to have a specialist because one of the jobs that we do is simply keeping the bias out. And so you might make a connection that isn't there, or you might ask a question in a leading way, not intentionally, but just to be like, yeah, and you would want this, or what do you think about X? And even the wording you've chosen for X can change how they feel about it. And so being able to be very kind of stoic in that is important, not to say that others cannot do it. I definitely think this is a process where everyone should be involved, if nothing else, to learn the insights from what we've gleaned. But I love if you have your expert, and you're lucky enough for that, you have someone listening and they can learn. So after they've seen a couple interviews, it's a lot easier to follow that script. Or if you have someone write your template, we call it a protocol. It's a very loose script because I let the whole thing go wide. If they have a passion, I want to hear about it. If they're mad, I want to know why. But we just have our kind of standby protocol. And so some of those exceptions and cases can be hard for someone to just jump into. But that said, I've certainly taught folks how to do it in the process so that they can continue to. Um, as far as how many, it's kind of a joke. It reminds me of The Onion, but the answer is five. Like, I realize that's a crazy thing, but the answer for interviews is five. The answer for usability test is five. There was a great research study done a long while back about how much you learn when you do each test or each interview, and that's the point at which it starts to drop off in your value. So if you're really convincing someone to take the time to do this, that's my answer. If you have only two, if you have only one, you're not going to know if it's a pattern or if that person's mad. It's really great to have different versions of the same thing if you can. So two people coming to the site for the same needs, but this is a grandmother and this is a college student, or whatever their tasks change with. I'm just browsing versus I've already done this and I'm returning. These little kinds of nuances to learn what those differences are. But when I see something three times in five interviews, I know that that's a trend, and that's the kind of thing where you can use those metrics. And it also allows you to get a little variation in there as well. So those were kind of the first things. You were asking about kind of how we condense it into this persona, what it says on it, and then like how we use it later. It's quite a messy process of going through the notes and going through the draft. So one thing I use for interviews that I recommend is called Otter. But any recording transcription service is awesome if your interviewee is comfortable with that. Otherwise, one of us is frantically taking notes and we're trying to quote exactly what they're saying. Not for everything, but what's the way that they described it? Was there a charge? And then we can really analyze and interpret that later. So we have just docs and docs of stuff and comparing one question across a couple. Oh yeah, that's another thing you asked about was what the questions were. And I could go on, but like I found something I loved that was very simple that said, who are you? What brings you pleasure? What brings you pain? And I said, wow, I wrote that in 20 questions and you wrote it in three. Obviously, it's a little nicer to transition and get into what that means, but it's like, what is your relation to the DAS? How did you find us? How did you hear about us? If you did, what's your context and connection? What is the reason that you engage? What keeps you coming back? That's kind of your pleasure. What's the joy of this? Sometimes we do like to ask specifically, what is it about the site that you love now? Or what would you not want us to change? And we can learn the kinds of things that are really being valued already. And it's very validating for the agencies and it preserves some of what they're already doing. But yeah, what brings you pain is really, I think, the crux of the interviews. So what do you wish the site did better? What does it not do at all? Did you have any confusion while you were using it? Sometimes it's outside of us where they say, I didn't even know this existed, or I've been using this other website to do this thing, and I can't believe this is here. This is great. Or you're not part of PBS? No, we are not. Like there's kinds of things like that all the time where it's a larger problem than the website, but of course, that's what we're trying to solve. Um, One of my questions is if you had a magic wand, what's the one thing you would magically change today? Because a lot of people, when you ask them what their pains are, they have made a list and they're ready to talk. But I say, all right, you have one wish. What's your magic wish? And now I hear their priorities and I hear why it matters and what pain it's causing them. It's not just like, I need this feature. It's right now I have this problem, and if you did it this way, I would have this experience instead. So it's some of it is about site usage and habits, but it's very much less about like the website initially and more about who are you and why, what brought you to apprenticeship and why are you considering the site and what kind of thing would help you become an apprentice? Or, for example, how do you decide what company to work with? And now we see the kinds of like metadata that we're going to put on that page because we know that's the kind of stuff that they're looking for. So I forgot the question. Now, after we wade through all of the stuff, that's how we get into what you see here. We are synthesizing, condensing, summarizing. So pre-apprentice, what it says at the top, underneath that, the categories are bio, motivations, needs and frustrations, and desired experience. To the left of that, we have a photo of the person, just stock. Oh yeah, hold on. Age, what their need, where they are, and reading level, things like that. Yeah, I saw you want to jump in.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm just realizing the time and I just want to time manage that I feel like I
Sure. We
accidentally
asked too much
did
about
this like
personas.
we could spend the whole rest of our time diving deep on the personas, which obviously I'm sort of inclined to do. But I know that I'm
Let
excited
me
about
keep going.
I'm really excited about getting to the tools. So I think we should, I think if people, want to see more detail here, maybe this is something we can share after, obviously this screenshot will be in the recording. Um, Maybe you could just give us a couple of the highlights of like what worked on the Department of Apprenticeship Standards project. And then I think we should turn towards
Absolutely.
tools so we have a chance to show people the tools.
Yeah, I did want to wrap DAS because I said, what did we do? A lot of little things.
Yeah, yeah.
So we used something like this persona to really inform all of the steps along the way. And we made so many little changes one by one that really helped. So things like page labeling, making sure that the phrases were things we heard in our interviews instead of silo kind of industry jargon. We got away from the jargon big time, breaking up pages, chunking, bulleted lists, headings, even line breaks made each individual page more readable. And that's a big improvement with not a lot of work. Um, some of it was looking through the reading levels and simplifying them. So rewriting important pages to save a grade, as an example. And then there were some other pieces where we found that there was more functionality that could be beneficial. And so creating more functionality within the website and kind of some of the things that weren't captured from that. But you'd be amazed, just like retitling the pages to be clear and making sure the paragraphs are written nicely with a label and a break when they end, goes a long way. So from my perspective, lots of good improvements, lots of happy goals met around the site content being much more user-oriented, much more action-oriented, much less about the jargon. Um, but then they have been doing, since this one is a little older, we have the benefit of having the feedback and the user research to know that the user experience has improved based on what the users have told us. So they've been really happy in different submissions. They had an Ask Mass, kind of reach out to hear feedback. But my favorite one is that fewer of the frequently asked questions that they used to get all the time are coming up on the phone. So their phone line is just simply less busy and they can spend more time doing better work, doing other work instead of saying the same answer over and over. And same thing for the users. They don't have to call, they can just find it. So I think it's really saved a lot of time and effort on both sides. And I know folks love their data, so I'll throw in a 50% decrease in the bounce rate on the site, which is significant. Um, yeah, so how's that for your improvements? It's a long time coming, but thanks for giving me a little space before we went into the tooling.
Yeah, those are awesome. Thank you for sharing those.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the time check as well.
Yeah. Okay, so should we make a hard turn towards tools so that we can, use the rest of the time left to look through the tools that you have to share?
Sure. I can jump in with that if that's helpful.
Yeah, I think so.
So the first one that I've already shared, Screaming Frog is what I use to pull all of the information, create a site audit. I get the reading levels and things like that from here as well. If I integrate this with Google Analytics, I can put all the fancy stuff into the audit. So Screaming Frog is my favorite for this kind of thing. Now, this might be a big ask, So I also wanted to mention different data tools. So for example, this is Acquia Optimize, which was formerly known as Moncito. Some folks might recognize that name. And essentially what it does is allows the site editors to just see at a glance how their site is doing. So their dashboard includes things like quality assurance, accessibility, what kinds of errors there are on the site. So I love this as a small step tool. There's a bunch of broken links on this site. Let me go fix that. There's two pages that have similar titles. These haven't gotten a lot of visits. It really kind of lets you pick a little bit to work on at a time if you're really busy. That said, there are lots of other alternatives. We use Lighthouse a lot at Lullabot as well. It's actually integrated into Tugboat, one of our products. So that gives you very quickly what's your accessibility score, what's your quality, your content quality score, how high is the reading level overall, and where are the problem kind of children to call that out. I think that Google Analytics is a great alternative that most have access to. It's just got a lot of options and tools and things you can do in it. Acquia Optimize is one that I think is really great for authors to just kind of see the kinds of improvements we're talking about. It makes the conversations even easier because they're like, oh yeah, that site did have a low score because of X and Y. So that's a big one for me. One more I have to call out. This is a big one for me. This is a free tool called Hemingway Editor. They offer a desktop app that you can buy, but you can go to hemingwayapp.com right now and it will open in the browser and you can just work on it. And here's a page that we're working on and I just dropped it in as an example. And what it does on the right side is live give you some readability information. So it says, this is grade 11, aim for 9. It's a little high. As we were working on it, it went down from 13. And I did that in Hemingway Editor. I'll say as a spoiler, most of that is putting a period where there's a comma. Breaking up the sentences is really helpful. But you can see it's explaining to you why. So you're not just getting this number that you have to you know, bang on, it says, your app verbs are kind of unnecessary. Or it'll call out things like utilize and leverage and tell you, why not just use? So there's a lot of little things like that where I really appreciate it. And that kind of yellow and red of this sentence could be better, or no, this sentence really needs some work, allows you to really get into that content design nitty-gritty, break things up, rephrase. So yeah, Hemingway Editor is one that I've been happy a couple of my authors have adopted as well. So those are the real big ones for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for running us through those. I'll make sure we include links to all of those tools below the video where this is posted on YouTube, and we'll send it out to folks after as well. Um, Maybe we could just wrap up. I'm pretty sure that two of the sites that you've worked on received awards this last year. Want to take us to that and end on a high note?
Sure. Thanks for tooting my horn. Yeah, I've been working on state websites for about 6 years now, and two of the big three were first and second this year. So the Government Experience Awards does tons of different categories, but overall state government experience. Number one was Massachusetts, and number two was Iowa. So it's not exactly the metrics and improvement that you meant, but it is really nice to see that the work is being appreciated and has already come a long way. So thank you for that.
Yeah, way to go, Massachusetts. Way to go, Iowa. I wish I could make confetti appear on the screen or something. I've recently moved to if I could do that. Okay. But love that. Thank you so much for
Just real
your
confetti next
time.
time.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to
Just
talk.
real. Thank you. I really appreciated it. And yeah, sorry for a couple of the tech delays today. And I hope everyone got something out of it.
Thanks so much. Thanks, folks, for tuning in.